Thank you so much for the intro, and I'm so excited to be here to be a part of Sales 3.0. Like, can't wait till Sales 9.0 and 11.0 and 12.3, because as we all know, sales continues to change, continues to evolve, and that's what's so fun about being a part of all this is everyone here is on that forefront. We're thinking about where are things going and how can we adapt now, which is why I'm so excited to be diving into revenue leadership, how to align stakeholders internally, right? Because so often we can be our own biggest enemies in this entire process. And so for those of you that don't know me, Kevin Dorsey, everybody calls me KD. Unless I get out of line, then you can call me Kevin. And really, I've been building sales teams for the last 10 years. I have 4 builds to over 100 plus people in very short periods of time. And one of the things I've learned and gotten wrong along the way is how to align internally on how to achieve the goals we are trying to achieve as a company. So that's what we're focused on today, and we will dive right into it. And so really around the idea that this is not mind-blowing, but the best work together. It sounds simple, but why is it actually so rare in the real world to find companies that truly seem to be working together cross-functionally across all the different revenue leaders? The best teams act like a team. They think like a team. They fight like a team. Companies should be the ultimate team. They really should, because there's one clear goal we are all trying to achieve. Yet so often we squabble like children. We really do. And I think if we think about it, it's actually comical when you really sit back and think about it and go, we all have a job to do. It's to generate as much revenue as possible. And yet internally, we can be in conflict. Internally, we can actually work against each other and actually work against the very revenue goal that we are trying to hit. And so we need to find ways to fix this, to address this, right? So why can't we all just get along? Why can't we all just get along? What prevents alignment? So one of the things that I always preach to my leaders and to my teams is oftentimes when we're trying to drive behavior or trying to change something, the first question you actually have to ask is, what prevents it? So often we will focus on what we need to achieve and what we want to change without asking the question, what's preventing it in the first place? Because if we can identify what's preventing it, that's how we can actually make changes and suggestions to truly correct it. So often, and I work with a coach, I highly recommend working with the coach. One of the things that he tells me often is you can't sprinkle seeds on weeded soil. And I've always liked that analogy within business as well, is we can talk about all we want of where we want things to go and where we need things to go and what changes to make. But if we never address why they haven't changed and what prevents alignment, we'll never actually get there. So something I highly recommend reading, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, is an absolute classic around some of those topics. And we'll actually go through it at a high level in this session because it's important to identify what are the things that prevent alignment. Because if we can solve for those, then we actually make room for alignment. So The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team is a classic book by Patrick Lencioni. Highly recommend reading it. And it is crucial to understand the causes of dysfunction, because then we can actually address them. At its core, the biggest issue that hurts us with alignment is people's emotions and egos. And yes, we have emotions, we have egos. It's not just them over in product, it's not just them over in marketing. We have emotions and ego as well. And the first step, right, is admitting. That's the first step in solving anything. If we are willing to admit we have emotions, we have egos, but so do the people we're working with, that allows us to adapt our behaviors accordingly to ideally make the changes that we need to, right? People are emotional. We have to remember that, because so often we only try to come from logic when in reality it's the emotions that are holding us back, right? As much as we want to be logical in business, we're not. You know why? Because we're people. If you really think about it, in our evolution as a species, business is relatively new. We weren't running businesses tens of thousands of years ago. We woke up, did what we needed to survive, take care of our tribe, and that was it. Business, even as a concept, is new. So this idea of being logical, just go for the revenue, doesn't actually work if you don't address the human element in this process. So dysfunction number one, absence of trust, right? This is the foundational dysfunction. If you do not trust each other, how can you ever be aligned, right? This is what holds us back, is there's a lack of trust. Now, trust starts with actually getting to know the person and then applying it to business. How well do you know your cross-functional partners? How well do you know their goals? What they do for fun outside of work, what they are trying to achieve, what they like and don't like about their role and about their job. You actually need to understand the person and connect with them first. And that's what actually opens up the business relationship. Be a good human, right? The golden rule, treat others how you would like to be treated. We seem to always apply that to ourselves, but not when we're working cross-functionally. And then we wonder why we're out of alignment, right? So it's so important. Be a good human, be positive, be supportive, encourage your cross-functional partners, recognize and celebrate. When's the last time you recognized one of your revenue leaders on the other side of the pond, on the other side of the aisle, right? So often we're so hungry for our own credit, for getting the win, that we don't recognize our cross-functional partners, and then we wonder why there's not alignment. So this is dysfunction number one, absence of trust. If you do not trust your fellow leaders, we will never be able to get aligned, and trust begins with communication and learning about each other. So number two, fear of conflict. So another highly recommended read, Radical Candor by Kim Scott. All of my leaders had to read this book and the 5 Dysfunctions, because so often it's the avoidance of conflict that we think is helping us, that we think is going for alignment, but it actually works the other direction. Fear of conflict prevents us from sharing feedback. Fear of conflict actually prevents us from getting aligned. We might think by not saying anything we're aligned, but the complete opposite. We never actually agreed because we are afraid of the conflict. It leads to solutions that no one loves, because no one loves, no one actually commits to it. No one actually does it. We leave that meeting and people think there's alignment, but because we were afraid to voice it, because we were afraid to say, hey, we need to fix this, nothing actually occurs, right? So one of the things it talks about in the book, and if you think about high-performing leadership teams, it says demand debate. Demand it, not just support it, demand it. Make sure it happens all the time. Okay, everyone agrees? Okay, counterpoint time. Everybody agrees, it's time to create counterpoints. If you disagreed with this, why would you? What would you do differently? What was the complete opposite of this? You need to create a culture where debating is a good thing. Debates are how you get to the end result we're looking for. Yet fear of conflict, especially around leaders, because we are all afraid of upsetting the other person. We're all afraid of hurting that person's ego. But in a way, we're actually afraid of hurting our ego because we don't want to hurt their ego and get yelled at for it. Demand debate. You cannot fear conflict. Once you've debated, you agree on the end goal and work for ways to get there. This is not about just being confrontational. This is not about always being a devil's advocate or being contrarian, but you have to be willing to voice disagreement. You have to be willing to debate topics, not people. And this is the key. You are debating the problem. You are debating the path. You are not debating the person, because as soon as you make it personal, we are now again out of alignment. But conflict is healthy in any and all relationships. I can't remember the book that it was from, but it talks about if everyone is always happy, someone's not telling the truth. And that's always stuck with me, because everyone's going to have different viewpoints. You have to be willing to discuss them to have alignment. Number 3, lack of commitment, right? You may not always agree, but you have to always commit to action, right? Because what's going to be done because of what's being discussed? And y'all know this, you've been in these meetings, right? Where you're in the meeting, there's all this back and forth, and it's like, okay, all right, we're aligned. On what? There's actually no commitment to do anything. Commitment means doing what you said you were going to do and honoring that commitment. We've all been there, myself included, where we say, all right, yeah, sure, I'll do that. and we know we're not going to do it. That is a lack of commitment, and that can become cultural, where again, back to here, fear of conflict will make us say, yeah, sure, I'll do it. But then we don't actually do it, and commitment is holding to that. Commitments, though, can change. You can commit to something and then realize it's not aligned and pull back that commitment, but you have to communicate it. But we have to commit to action. There is no alignment if we're not committed to something. Otherwise, we're just talking about it. And I think we all can realize this. We will spend months, quarters, sometimes a year talking about the same topic with no commitment to action. And without commitment, nothing changes, nothing will occur. But something that's very important when it comes to alignment is check for conflicting commitments. So here's an example. We are committed to more revenue. We're also committing to reducing churn. Could you see how maybe those could conflict with each other? One side is going to be trying to drive as much revenue as possible, while another side is trying to keep as much revenue as possible. Those could be conflicting commitments. And we'll talk about this a little bit later in this presentation on how important clarity of commitment is, but you have to check for conflicting commitments. If I'm committing to this, is there anything that might be working against it? Because if so, we need to address it early. Then we get to the next dysfunction, lack of accountability. And isn't it funny as leaders, like we really want our team to be more accountable, but then as a revenue leadership team, sometimes we don't hold each other accountable, right? We don't always make sure we follow through, but have all the ideas in the world and not take action. No one takes ownership. Everybody's nodding, but nothing gets done, right? Or we're pointing fingers. Oh, it didn't work because of product. Sales has never said that, ever. Oh, it didn't work because of sales. CS has never said that, right? Oh, we didn't hit our target because of marketing. Sales has never said that, right? We always look to others. We point fingers versus taking accountability for what we're responsible for, what we are supposed to do. So funny enough, on my sales teams, you could not complain about marketing leads unless you were working them the exact way we agreed to. You can't come to me or then go to marketing and say the leads are bad if you only called them 2 times. You had to prove they were bad by working them the right way, right? By taking action and taking accountability. But for accountability to occur, this is very important: clarity, communication, and closure. The 3 C's of accountability. You cannot hold someone accountable if it's not clear what they're supposed to do. You cannot hold someone accountable if you did not communicate what needed to be done and get agreement. This is a big part of accountability. If you don't get agreement, there's nothing to hold someone accountable to. The only way you get agreement is by asking for closure. Can you? Will you? Those are my 2 favorite accountability questions. So once we've talked about what we're going to do, first question, Gerhard, can you? Can you do this? Can you get this done by XYZ? He says, yes. Follow-up question, will you? This is where we're getting commitment. And now we actually can hold someone accountable, because if they never agreed, there's actually nothing to hold them accountable to. Who is doing what by when is the key to accountability. So often meetings end like this. Okay, great. So marketing, you're on that? And marketing says, yeah, we've got it. Is that ownership? Is that who, when, and how? It's not. And then on top of it, if we don't hold each other accountable, back to fear of conflict, we're afraid to hold someone accountable, say, hey, you did not uphold your end of the bargain. Remember that we agreed to this. This needs to be done and we need to work on it, right? That proactive follow-up is key. So often we wait to hold people accountable too late. The deadline's already passed. And then we're like, what happened? Versus checking in ahead of time to make sure we're on pace for it, right? The 1-page digest system is one of my favorite ways to do this. And I have an example to show y'all a little bit later on what this looks like to help make communication, clarity, and closure much easier to do. And then we get to 5. inattention to results, right? We are in business and we are trying to achieve a result, but do we know what result we're trying to achieve? Because at the end of the day, results matter. Okay, cool. We're accountable. Okay, cool. We're committed. Okay, cool. We have trust. But if we're not getting the results that we want, it doesn't matter. The result we're looking for needs to be defined as well. What does the end goal look like, right? So an acronym that I'm getting known for a little bit is WIGGLE. So WIGGLE is WGLL. What good looks like. That's the WIGGLE. If we don't pay attention to the WIGGLE, if we don't pay attention to what good looks like and what result we're actually trying to achieve, then what are we even aligning around? So often we actually can't be aligned because we're all trying to achieve different results. Hear me out here. Sales trying to hit revenue. CS trying to reduce churn. Product trying to hit the roadmap. Marketing trying to hit leads. Finance trying to reduce expenses. Do you see how maybe all of those results might actually work against each other because we never figured out the key result we're looking for? What does the end result look like? Why is that what we're looking for? This is actually where it starts. Because if anyone saw the movie Alice in Wonderland, not the newer one with Johnny Depp that was so weird, like the original one, right? The cartoon one. At one point, Alice is walking through the forest and she runs into the Cheshire Cat and asks the cat, which way should I go? And the cat responds back to her and says, well, where are you trying to go? And she says, I'm not sure, really. And he says, well, then it doesn't matter which way you go. Now, it's laughable when you think about that in a cartoon, but isn't that how we run a lot of our teams? We don't actually know what we're trying to align around, and then we wonder why there's lack of alignment, right? So we need to make sure that we address this. What is the end result we're trying to achieve? Because that's where we work backwards from, okay? And revenue leaders, we need to remember this. We are revenue leaders. So sales, what's your priority? Revenue. CS, what's your priority? Revenue. Marketing, what's your priority? Revenue. Product, what's your priority? Revenue. Finance, what's your priority? Revenue. Now, there's different ways to get there. That's maybe new revenue, maybe it's keeping revenue, but at the end of the day, revenue is what we're doing because without it, it doesn't matter. What happens if we meet our churn goal but miss our revenue goal? Are we good? No. What happens if we meet our lead goal but miss our revenue goal? Are we good? No. What do? We cut our expenses, but we miss our revenue goal. Revenue is what we're here to do, and we need to align around it. So one of the things that is highly recommended is you need to identify the number one metric, right? Because the number one result we're looking for is revenue. That is what whether it's growth or keeping the revenue that's coming in. Revenue is that number one, but we need to identify the key metrics behind that result. This is very, very important, is what metrics are leading to that revenue, right? Because once you agree to the number one metric, now you have something to align around, because revenue is a result. You can't change revenue. You can't change results without changing a metric. That's the key, is what's the metric we're aligning around, because there's different ways to get to the result. So we say revenue, well, one metric could be increasing close rate. Another metric could be increasing ACV. Another metric could be increasing utilization, because increasing utilization decreases churn, which increases revenue, right? Another metric could be upsell revenue. Well, in order to do better upsells, we need better white space analysis and what types of industries upsell. So you can see by aligning around that number one metric, that's what sets up the alignment. Is the number one metric churn? Is the number one metric activation? Is the number one metric ACV? Is the number one metric close rate? Because you can see if churn is the number one metric, maybe we do have to make some changes on the sales side, because maybe there's certain types of deals that churn at a higher rate. If we've agreed to that being the number one metric, we can now set expectations across sales. Maybe it is activation, right? We're just not getting people into the product more. If that's number one, that impacts how CS works, how marketing works, and how sales works, right? We need to start with the number one, right? Maybe it's pipeline, because we do this all the time. And truthfully, this is where the misalignment happens. CS is focused on churn. Sales is focused on revenue. Marketing is focused on pipeline and leads, and product is focused on activation and utilization. How can we be aligned on 4 different things? We have to align on one and then work towards it, because as much as we want to improve them all, we can't, right? They will all impact each other. And it's important that we remember that as revenue leaders. Because here's the actual term I wanted to get to: leveragement. Yes, I'm making up terms now. Deal with it. It is what it is. I don't want to talk about alignment, because we can be aligned in the wrong direction. You follow me here? We could be aligned going the wrong way, whereas leverage brings in the idea of results. It's about leveraging your fellow workers. It's about leveraging your fellow departments on how to improve your own department. Alignment to me is actually too soft. Okay, we're aligned. Doesn't mean we're helping each other. Doesn't mean we're leveraging each other to get better results. It doesn't mean we're working together. You can be aligned, but still separate. Whereas leverage, you are connected, which is why I love to make up this term of leveragement. This is when a company can really start to click and hit new highs. When sales is leveraging marketing, and marketing is leveraging CS, and CS is leveraging product, right? When we are working together to leverage, that is what leads to accelerated results. Whereas alignment, we can still be in our own lanes and just be aligned, right? Leverage includes results. Alignment is about agreement. Leverage is about increasing our results, accomplishing more than you could on your own, right? So one of my favorite exercises to run is strengths and insight exercises, but not about people, but about the orgs. What do your cross-functional orgs have access to that you don't? Think about this for a second, and I'll give you some examples. But if you're in sales, what does CS have access to that you don't? If you're in CS, what does sales have access to that you don't? If you're in marketing, what does product have access to that you don't? What are the insights of your cross-functional team members? What are the strengths of those orgs? What is product really good at that maybe sales isn't? What is finance really good at that maybe marketing isn't, right? It's like, what are the strengths of your cross-functional orgs? Have you ever sat back to do that? Because we'll bicker and we'll fight, but we never sit back and go like, what is CS really good at that maybe sales isn't so good at? Like note-taking, just throwing that out as an example, right? But it's things like this where like, what are their strengths and how could you leverage that? And I'm gonna give you some examples to get like the wheels spinning a little bit. But what insights could you gather, right? Where are you weak that they could help? And being okay to admit this helps build alignment. Back to trust. When you remove the ego and you're willing to admit to say, hey, like, honestly, we're not the best at this and we could use some help, right? So something that happens often with a lot of the companies I work with, like CS is like, we have the relationships and we know the prospect and we know the persona, but when it comes to asking for the money, maybe we're still a little bit weak there. We could use some sales help. As opposed to saying, well, stay away, you could work together. That's leveragement right there, right? So here's some examples, okay, to get the wheel spinning. CS has access to churn data and customer insights. How could sales and product learn from this? CS knows why people are churning and has all the customer conversations. How could sales and product learn from this? Leveragement. Product has access to utilization reports, right? What parts of the product get used the most? How could CS and sales benefit from that? How could sales benefit from knowing what parts of the product get used the most? How could CS benefit from knowing what parts of the product don't get used a lot? Leveragement. Y'all are going to stick with this word. Sales has access to close lost reasons and the prospects, right? The people are saying no. How could marketing and product use this information? We keep losing deals because of X objection. Marketing, go get some testimonials that address that objection. We keep losing deals because of this product feature. Product, go build that feature, right? Leveragement. These are things that product does not have access to. Marketing has access to keyword searches and keyword volume. How could sales and product use that? If product knew what most of the website traffic was looking for when they came across your company, maybe they could ensure it has the product features that it should. And we highlight those more. And if sales knows what people are searching for inbound, they can use the same messaging outbound. This is leveragement, where you are using what the other orgs are good at and have access to benefit your own to get to the end result we're all looking for, which is increased revenue, right? Because the cross-functional communication here is key. So often we don't even know what the other side is working on. We have no idea, right? They're just off doing their thing. We're doing our things. What are their key projects? What metrics are they focused on? I'd strongly recommend at least bi-weekly, but monthly is normally pretty okay, of like cross-functional leadership meetings. But here's the key: with an agreed upon agenda. This is not just another meeting so everyone can talk about what they're working on. True story, y'all. Meetings are to work on, not to update. An update belongs on a digest, which we'll cover here in a second. Meetings are not just to tell each other what we're working on. You can put that in an email. The meeting is actually to work on something. And we've agreed upon, hey, we are really trying to figure out how we can increase our speed to launch in CS. Everybody come to the meeting with ideas on how your org could contribute to that. Sales, how could you help speed up the speed of launch? Product, how could you help speed up the speed of launch? Finance, how could you speed up? Everyone's coming in to work on the business. We spend so much time working in the business that we never spend time working on the business together, right? Not just in the business, on the business. How can we do those things? The weekly digest is something that helped me and my teams in a big way, which was cross-functionally and key projects, a weekly digest to keep people up to date. What's the current status? What are the key trends and metrics? Who do we got to call out? Who's doing some great work right now that we can recognize? What are the lowlights? And one of the things I always love to call out about lowlights, volume versus volume, meaning is it a loud problem, just loud volume, or is it high volume in terms of frequency, meaning it's happening a lot? Those are the problems we need to align around. And y'all, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We have all been in meetings for hours talking about a problem that happens once a quarter, but it's loud, right? Oh, we keep getting leads that are DQ'd. Is it like every lead's DQ'd, or is it 1 out of every 10 is DQ'd? Volume versus volume, because 1 out of every 10, that's actually a pretty good ratio. Of course, you're going to have some DQ'd leads, right? The product keeps crashing. Okay, like for real though? Or is it once every 90 days, the product goes down for 45 seconds and people freak out over those 45 seconds? Volume versus volume. And the weekly digest helps cover this. What are the key projects cross-functionally? What's the key progress cross-functionally? Back to accountability and commitment to a result. Who are the key people working on it? And this is sent out on a weekly basis. This is what helps prevent the needless meetings, right? Where we're just talking about meetings about these things, whereas the doc helps create this to say, hey, here are the updates. If someone wants to meet, we can, right? You can comment, you can ask questions on it, but that way we're not having useless meetings, because we also know what that's like, to sit in a meeting and listen to, product and CS fight over something, and sales, we're sitting back like, I'm sure glad I'm in this meeting. This is great, right? Versus if that was on a digest and people were able to read it ahead of time, we can actually make some progress. But meetings, get the updates out of the way. Meetings are to work on things together. That is the key to cross collaboration, alignment, and leveragement, right? So this is an example, right? Outstanding items, needs and asks, lowlights, highlights, key trends, current status. That gets sent out every Friday on whoever's working on it, and then you have it. And that's just compiled over time to say, hey, this all looks good, keep it up. Or, hey, I noticed one of the lowlights is people aren't showing up to their kickoff calls. I'd like to sit down with you and sales to figure out how we can help people show up more to their kickoff calls. Now that meeting is about working on kickoff calls. It's not just to talk about the problem. I hate meetings. Anyone that's ever worked with me knows that. I don't want to have a meeting about a meeting. Let's get something done in the meeting. And the weekly digest really helps set that up. But at the end of the day, all of this starts at the top. And so if I have CEOs on here, this starts with you. If you're an SVP, CRO, right? Chief Revenue Officer. A lot of CROs still act like glorified sales leaders. They're not thinking revenue, they're thinking sales. It starts at the top, okay? The culture starts at the top. The vision starts at the top. The virtues starts at the top. So the difference between values and virtues. Values are what you believe. Virtues are how you behave. You need to define these things, right? I'm sure many of you listening have company values. Can you name them all without looking? Maybe you can. Could your team? Could your team name all the values without looking? Because if not, if you don't know the values, you can't live them. Virtues are how you behave. What are the behaviors of your org? And outlining this is how a world-class org would behave. Those are so important to be set by the top. What are the expectations? Because if we're honest, internal alignment is oftentimes a bigger issue than we care to admit. Like CS, are you always aligned internally on what CS should be doing? Sales, I'm sure it never happens in sales where we have different ideas and ways of accomplishing things. Product, are you aligned internally? Marketing, are you aligned internally? That starts with the top, about narrowing that focus on what is it we are trying to achieve and how, right? Everything done externally, these weekly digests, external and internal. Commitment to action, external and internal, right? Everything that needs to be done externally actually starts internally with your own team. That's how you set the foundation to be aligned, right? Because if you are not aligned internally, how on earth can you be aligned externally? And if you're not leveraging your internal processes, your internal talent, how can you possibly leverage other orgs? This is so important to understand and realize, right? So to recap on this, y'all, I know we were moving fast, but this is very important to dive into. One, you have to avoid the dysfunctions. So obviously today we covered the dysfunctions, but any area that you're trying to make improvement, always ask the question, what's preventing? What's causing the issue? Not just where do we want to go, because then again, you're throwing seeds on weeded soil. We never pulled the weeds. Avoiding the dysfunctions, that's pulling the weeds that prevent us from being aligned, that prevent us from leveraging each other. It takes proactive work as a team. That's the next step. You have to proactively do this. You can't just wait for other people. You have to be the one that leads the charge. Next, define the direction. What is it we're trying to achieve? What is that result? What is that metric? What are those behaviors, right? One of the methods that I've used with my teams as we've scaled over the years is the D3 method. Define, document, demonstrate. Define where we're trying to go, document it, and demonstrate it. How are we actually going to get there? So what's the direction? What are the virtues? How are we going to behave? Pick your metric. You cannot compete with each other. That doesn't work. You cannot have conflicting metrics. Marketing is measured on leads. Sales is measured on revenue. CS is measured on churn. Those are conflicting metrics. Marketing is going to get in all the leads and sales is going, these aren't good. Sales is trying to close all the deals it can. CS is saying these aren't good, right? You have to align around what is that number one metric as a company and then leverage each other. Don't align. I know the title of this was alignment, but it's about leveraging. How can CS make sales better? How can sales make CS better? How can marketing make sales better? How can sales make product better? How can product make CS better? It's about leveraging each other to increase results, not just aligning on how we are doing things. You set the tone at the top. That is leading by example. Is how do you lead your people? How do you communicate? How do you do things internally with your own org? And that's what sets you up to do it externally with the other orgs, right? And at the end of the day, y'all, we got to remember, we're all in this together. We all want the same thing. We want our company to succeed. We want our people to succeed, and we want to succeed ourselves. And if we leverage each other, that's the best way and the fastest way to get there. Alignment isn't enough. Leveraging is how you take a company to the next level. And that's hopefully what you were able to gather from this presentation today. So thank you so much for your time, for your energy, your participation and attention in all this. Stay with us here. I'm going to hand the mic back over to the Sales 3.0 team here to keep it going. There's so much more content coming your way, but I appreciate everybody. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn for any follow-up, but thank you so much. And I'll pass the mic back over to you all. Thank you.